Hey everyone, and welcome to the studio. Today we're going to be using a 14 by 18 inch canvas for our lesson. What we're going to work on today is creating a landscape where the background has a lot of layers of clouds, where you can see a little bit of sky peeking through, so the blue sky. So you know those days where it's kind of like a partly cloudy day and you've got little speckles or openings of blue sky here and there. Creates a lot of layers and distance within the sky, and that's what we're going to work on today than our traditional landscape. So the first thing we're going to start off with, we're going to take a round brush, and I've got cerulean blue and ultramarine blue, titanium white, and I'm going to take the cerulean blue and just a little bit of ultramarine blue, and then a decent amount of white. So this is going to be kind of that pale blue sky that shows through. And what we're going to do is just pick a spot kind of in the middle of the canvas and just do a really random kind of shape. And you can have little spots here like this where it's not completely connected. You can maybe slightly connect it, but all of those little things will make the sky opening a little more dynamic and interesting to look at. So just a nice blue sky, almost looks like a mouth or lips there. So just like random shapes, that just kind of goes to show that you can basically make any shape and it will work really well. I'm going to go a little bit more cerulean blue and white, and then we'll go even lighter. And I'm just going to do another layer that's slightly lighter on top of that first layer. And maybe I'll do a little spot up here. Some of this stuff's going to get covered up anyway, so this part in the middle will most likely be the spot that you see the most of. So you can do a couple little random spots here and there. They may not make the cut of the painting. If you want to think about it in that way, you might end up covering them up. But it's always good to have all of these spots on here so you don't have any gaps when you're looking through the landscape into the background. So you can see lots of little variations here, just playing around with this shape. And this will also probably change too as I add in the clouds around it. So the next thing I want to do is I'm going to take some burnt umber. I can find it here. Alright, so we're using burnt umber today. I'm just going to take a little bit of that and add it into that sky color. I'm going to take a little more ultramarine blue because the red that's in the ultramarine blue will kind of neutralize the brown of the burnt umber. So we're going to take that dark color, we're going to add a bunch of white to it. We want a good amount of paint here so we can start to cover larger amounts of canvas. So the idea with this is that we'll block in a lot of this area, all of these sky or these cloud areas with this color, and then we're going to go lighter and darker layers. So the trick here is to just fill in. And like I mentioned a minute ago, we want a decent amount of paint. We don't want any of the white canvas showing through, so we definitely want to get this filled in the best we can. Don't want to skimp on the paint in this section. These first layers are always really important, especially in acrylic painting, that we get a good base that we can work with. So I typically paint dark to light. In this painting, however, we're going to do mid-tone to dark and mid-tone to light. So we're going to start with this mid-tone color, and then we're going to add in lighter and darker layers. So the values, you can see the sky and the clouds are similar values right now. What I want to do now is just mix some more color. So not always easy to match the same color, which is okay, as long as it's close. For this layer, it doesn't matter. So don't hyper focus on trying to get the exact same color if you have to remix. All you want to do is get something a little bit, the same value. So keep adding white until it's about the same value, and then from there you can see slightly different color. That's okay. What you can do is you can incorporate it in some of the stuff that you already painted, so it will all tie together. But once we start layering, you'll see that it doesn't matter that the color isn't exactly the same. So you can see I'm also leaving these little spaces where the clouds and sky connect. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want the sky to be a little bit dry before I start overlapping into it. And I'm going to just lightly scrub so that way I soften the edge of the cloud as it connects up to the sky. And you'll see that in a minute, but we're leaving that little gap for now. And for this painting, what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint it like I used to, and that's I'm going to paint all the way down to the bottom, even though that's going to get covered up later. So I added a little bit of water to the paint. Just, it's starting to dry up a little bit, so just all I did was I dipped my brush into the water a little bit. So that way it just makes the paint a little easier to move around. And these bottom layers really don't matter too much. The reason why I'm painting all the way down to the bottom is because I want to be able to see the values of the paint better. And sometimes if you leave some of the canvas open, it's hard to determine your value range because you're competing with that really bright white canvas. So getting all of this covered up down here, and then we'll add in, so once that's all covered up, we want to just kind of go around, make sure all of that stark white canvas is covered up throughout the cloud areas. And then we'll take our round brush, and along these edges here, we're just going to lightly scrub to get that covered up. And as you do that, you can kind of just swirl around a little bit, and what happens is you get this really nice soft edge as you overlap into that open sky. Okay, so you can see here just light pressure. The sky is still a little bit wet, so it makes for a nice edge as you slowly swirl around. So another thing to keep in mind is you can always adjust the opening, the sky opening later on. This is just a little bit of a placeholder for now, and then if we find we want to add more of that open sky, we can. But for now, it's just kind of a placeholder. We may end up just keeping it how it is, but we also might adjust it. So you don't have to feel like this is the end all be all of your open sky. You can add more later. We're just kind of getting the technique down to start with, and then we'll play around with the composition. Obviously you want to have something to start with, but that doesn't mean you can't adjust it later on. So what I'm going to do now is just go through and smooth out my brush strokes while they're still. Okay, so now what I want to do is start layering the clouds a little bit more. So I'm going to take that same cloud color and add more white to it. Alright, so we're not going super bright, we're just adding a little bit of white, and I'm going to start down here and along this edge maybe I'll add just a little bit of contour, and around this opening we'll add a little bit of white. But you can see we almost have this little piece of the cloud coming down and overlapping. And I'm just going to slowly, with light pressure, pull this paint down. Because it's still a little bit wet, so if you press too hard, you might scrape some of the paint off. We don't want to do that, so just light pressure here. Okay, I'm going to do the same over here. And just based on the current brush strokes in the sky, the opening here, I will be doing another layer over that. So kind of what we're doing here is separating. This cloud's almost like a darker cloud up here, and then these clouds you can paint out into the blue a little bit if you want for now. We'll do that more later. But these clouds, there's a highlight here. Basically we're going to have a light source, looks like coming left to right, so it's highlighting in these openings here on this side. Okay, and then maybe a little touch there. Alright, so now we have kind of a game plan for these two sections of clouds. What I'm going to do is let this dry because it's a little bit sticky, and I don't want to start scraping the paint off because I want to do some scrubbing techniques to get the clouds layered. And it's hard to do when you're painting on top of sticky paint. When it's wet on wet, it's okay, but the worst time to layer acrylic paint is when it feels sticky. At that point, what you want to do is just let it dry, so you don't get, you can kind of see the spot here where it scrapes the paint off. You don't want to get a lot of that going on. So let that dry completely. Probably take about 10 minutes, and then we'll move on to the next step. Alright, so this is all dry now. So what I want to do is continue on. I've got my ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, burnt umber, and a little bit of white. And so we're a little bit lighter now with our white. And you can see it goes on much smoother now that it's dry. I want to do the same thing that I kind of started with earlier on, which is highlighting these areas that are kind of in the opening of the blue sky area. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to wipe off my brush so there's a really thin layer of paint on here, and I'm going to scrub down And the lower I go, the less pressure I want to put on the brush. So I'm going to highlight up here as well, in this section. And I mentioned earlier a light source coming left to right, so as I come down here, as I go away from the sun, I'm going to scrub a little bit lighter. So I want to make that paint go a really long way. And once it runs out, then I can reload my brush with a very small amount of paint. I'll hit this side. I want some overlap with this cloud up here. We'll add more to that cloud later on. But I'm going to continue going down and away from my light source. It doesn't have to be a perfect blend. What we're really looking for is to create this kind of a lighter mid-tone gray and have it be hazy as we work our way down. So it kind of helps eliminate brush strokes that you had on there previously and just create an atmospheric feel. So that's why you want to scrub for as long as you can before reloading the brush. Alright, what I'm going to do now is take that same color, and still a very thin layer of paint, and I'm going to come up here and I'm going to create a couple layers within this cloud. So it's almost like breaking the cloud up into two. So this dark edge here will be a cloud out in front. Okay, so all we're trying to do right now is create a little bit of separation between some of these layers. Alright, so now I'm going to do the opposite, and I'm going to go ultramarine blue, a little bit of my burnt umber, and some white. And we're now trying to make a value that's a little bit darker. You can add a little bit of cerulean blue in there. You can come up here and test it. I want to go more ultramarine blue. I'll go a little bit more cerulean blue and burnt umber. And that's kind of the gray we want. So from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over this dark layer that we just created. And what you really want to pay attention to are the edges of your clouds. So as I go along this edge here, I'm doing very light pressure as it overlaps the sky underneath it. Okay, and then I can even do like a little break off cloud like that overlaps as well, and now you're creating even more depth in this little area right here. Okay, so I'm going to add a touch of water to that color and a little bit of white. And I want to come down here, and now I want to overlap this one a little bit. And we can have this kind of coming down through the sky. Okay, we don't need to overdo it because we want to add in some more layers to that middle section cloud. Okay, so I'm going to go into that same dark color again. Add a little burnt umber in there. We want the paint to be a little bit thicker on this one, so we'll go ahead and mix up some thicker paint here. Just going to test it. It's a little too light, so more ultramarine blue, touch of cerulean, and a touch of burnt umber. You can just test it, and that's pretty good right there. So now what I want to do is create these clouds coming through on the bottom side. So just random little break off areas on the top, and then thickening it up down here. So you can already start to see all of the layers that you're creating with this technique. So as you add in more and more brighter colors, all of these clouds here will appear darker. So you don't have to go so dark that it's, you know, like black clouds, or like the value is 10 times greater than the white. It has to be different, darker, but as you add the white up here, it's gonna appear darker anyway. So try not to go too dark to start with. You can always darken them up later. Okay, so just unique shapes. This stuff will kind of be cut off down here, so I'm not going to worry about the very bottom, because that's going to be cut off by the landscape. All right, maybe I'll do, instead of doing another layer on the sky, I'm just going to add in a couple more clouds that cover up the brush strokes. So it's a little trick that you can do to cover up brush strokes. I'll probably make that cloud white later on. All right, so what I'm going to do now is need to add a little bit more white to my palette. I'm going to go right into that cloud color, but add more white, because I want it to stay harmonized with the other colors. And I'll just start highlighting a little bit through here. And what I want to do this time is create some contour. So you're going to see I'm going to leave some of these dark areas to create contour shapes. So we'll round the cloud up a little bit here in the opening, and then we'll leave, as you can see here, we'll leave some of this dark stuff. We'll get this spot nice and light over here. You want to leave a lot of room to go lighter, so don't need to overdo the brightness to start with. Alright, so if we're thinking the light's coming this way, we'll highlight over here, same type of thing. But we'll leave some of that darkness right there. Maybe I'll throw in a little highlight. And I think I'm going to lighten up this cloud right now. So undecided on if I'll keep that or not. I might end up just going over it with my blue. I'll adjust it a little bit, try to make it a little bit better. It's nice to have some like wispy stuff in the blue. Again, it creates some more depth in that area. Alright, what I want to do is instead of reloading my brush, I'm just going to take it and wipe it off on a towel or my palette here. That way I have barely any paint on the brush. And I want to go into these areas here. And kind of do the same thing I did just a minute ago and leave some little dark contours. And that way we have a lot of little variations in that area. It makes the clouds look a little bit more realistic. I am going to go up here now with the same color and lighten the top part of this cloud. So I'm going to go really light pressure as I come down and away. Alright, so just adds a little bit more depth again up in that top part. So pretty happy with that. Only thing that I see here that I don't like is I have this little wispy cloud and this one, they look the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to brush through this one. To just kind of eliminate that similar shape. I can always add little crossover flat clouds that, you know, cross over these things later on. So don't want to worry about seeing something repetitive for right now. Alright, next what I'm going to do is I'm going to block in my composition that I'm going to have up here in the front, just like kind of like a basic overview, and then we'll work more on the cloud. Alright, so I want to stick within the same color scheme to start with. I'm going to take some of I've got a fan brush now, I've got some water in it, you can see. My burnt umber with that cerulean blue. We'll take a little bit of ultramarine blue. That's a little bit too dark, so we'll add a little white to that. I'll test it over here. That's where I want to be for now. So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to take my fan brush and we're going to create a hill. What I want to do is kind of create this little compositional element of an X. So we're creating these almost crisscrossing diagonals. They don't overlap, but if you were to extend, and I'll show you what I mean here in a minute, but if you were to extend this angle, it's going to cross over this angle coming down. So like an imaginary line of this cloud coming down is going to cross over this one, and same with this one going this way with this one. So it's kind of an X shape composition. So we're going to build up the kind of the peak area, and it doesn't have to be a perfect triangle. because that's kind of boring. So just an interesting shape like this, and then we can bring this across. So think of this line going up, kind of trails along with that cloud. The lines don't have to be perfect, you just want to create a little bit of a slope. And then we'll pull this color down. And I'm just tapping so that way the bristles create a kind of a jagged, soft edge at the top, which will help suggest maybe treetops in the distance. Okay, I'm actually going to build up this side a little bit. Again, we just want to get a peak, I should say a high point, kind of up towards the middle here. It's okay to have unique shape though. It's better to do that than to have just a triangular shape for any mountain or hill, because typically you don't see perfect triangles when it comes to mountains and rolling hills. Every once in a while, but I want to do something that's a little more visually interesting. Alright, so from here you want to create some atmosphere on this next layer. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to mix a slight bit of cerulean blue and white into this mix. I'm going to tap along the bottom. This. So you have to work relatively quickly because it will start drying. And what you want to do is kind of just tap it up. And you want to leave the top part of the mountain darker. And the bottom part lighter. So it should be a gradient of dark to light. The top part dark, bottom part light. I'll do another round of that. I'll go a little bit more white, touch more blue. I'll go along the bottom again. Just tap up. Trying to keep it pretty even. The brush strokes don't have to be perfect, but we want to keep the lightness even across. You don't want one side lighter than the other on this part. Okay, and then tapping up. Alright, next what we're going to do is take our cerulean blue, ultramarine blue, burnt umber. We're going to add some yellow ochre to it now. And that color right there is a little bit too brown, but what we're going to do is take that we're going to add some cerulean blue to it. It's going to make it much more green. A little bit more ultramarine blue to darken it up. Alright, so now what I want to do is a hill. That's kind of sitting below this bigger hill. I'm just going to bring it right down to bottom. And we're going to keep it really small in through this area. And I'm painting directly onto some of that wet paint. And that will help keep the top edge a little bit softer. Maybe we'll have it come up just a little bit. Right here and then back down as it trails off to the side. So creating this hill helps make this one look much taller. Alright, and again we want that to be a little bit hazy, so we'll add a little bit of white to that color. And then along the bottom. Just going to tap. Try to create a little bit of that atmospheric look. And all of these overlapping brush strokes, since they're not kind of brushed together, they'll create that sense of atmosphere just because there's all of these little variations. If you can try to keep the dark part of the hill or mountain at the top, it'll be more effective, but as long as you have all of these little random variations, it will create an atmospheric effect. Okay, I'll go back to my darker color. Just want to tidy up right here. It got a little faded out. So you can always go back to your darker color and adjust. Alright, I'm going to let that dry because next I want to just kind of block in this front area, and in the meantime I'm going to go back up into my clouds here. So let that portion here dry. We'll go back to our round brush now. I'm going to grab some of my white. Just a little bit of ultramarine blue. A little bit of cerulean blue too. So both of your blues and some white, and we'll just kind of test the color. I'll grab the tiniest bit of burnt umber. Okay, so just a slight value shift, a little bit lighter. Can start to create maybe a few contours. Even down here you can start to kind of break up some of this darker stuff. Okay, so you have almost like this part here is a little puffy cloud out in front, just very subtle. You don't have to do too much of that though, just a spot or two. Go a little bit lighter over here too. And I'm not going to overdo the clouds now. I think that's a pretty good combination of values. Don't want to overdo it because once I add in the rest of the landscape, it will affect how the clouds look. So I'm going to call that good for right now, because I can always come in and work around the areas that are open later on. So call that good for right now. Next I want to make sure this is completely dry, and then I'll move on to painting in the foreground area. Alright, this is pretty much dry, so what I'm going to do is move on to my next step, which is I'm going to start blocking in the foreground area. I'm going to start with a fan brush. And I've got a variety of colors here. I've got sap green, burnt sienna, ivory black, ultramarine blue, and yellow ochre. And I'm using black with yellow to create an earth green color. So we're going to start off with some of that black and yellow. And you'll see it's kind of like this muddy green color. I'm going to add ultramarine blue to that. Okay, so with this color, I'm going to go along just the bottom area here and get this all blocked in. We're going to start with just kind of a two-dimensional setup, and then we'll start adding in depth to it. So we're going to go across. Good layer of paint here. Alright, so got that part blocked in. Got a good thick layer of paint there. What I want to do is I want to frame in this opening here. So I'm going to put trees on each side that are tall and kind of go up off the top and just frame in that area. So I'm going to grab a liner brush. I'm going to add more ultramarine blue to this mix and some burnt sienna. We'll add a little bit of water to that so it's ink-like. Alright, so what I want to do is, like I said, frame in. So I'm going to put a tree be a tree trunk coming down. And I want to have a lot of little pieces of tree trunk coming down. I've got this part back here is a little bit wet, so you can see it's kind of getting faded as I cross over into that area. So I'm going to focus a little bit more on top until that dries. There's going to be a lot of foliage right through here. So just really thin branches. So the amount of pressure you put on the brush will determine how thick the branch is when you're using a liner brush. So the harder you press, the thicker the branch. I'll put a thicker tree over here. So just slightly thicker, it doesn't have to be a big drastic change. So you can see how I was talking about earlier, the clouds are going to get covered up some, which again is kind of why it didn't really matter to get everything too perfect. We really wanted to focus in on this area right there. Okay, so just a variety of tree trunks. Can do some small wispy branches coming off the bottom here. So really light pressure on the brush when you're creating those little wispy areas. So what we're trying to create here is kind of the sense that coming out to the edge of a tree line and looking through to an open meadow. We'll add some trees and stuff in the distance too to add some further depth. But right now what we're trying to do is just frame in this area. And a lot of this is going to be covered up with foliage. So don't worry about having all the branches perfectly connected or anything like that. It kind of gives us a basic setup of eventually foliage will come in over through this area. Go a little bit thicker there. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to add in just a little fir tree. So I'm going to go back to adding in a little bit more yellow and blue into this color. And we'll have a little fir tree popping up right here towards the middle. And draw a straight line down. And then with the liner brush, we'll point the liner brush out to one side like that and just pull in. And what you do is start crisscrossing them a little bit. So usually when it comes to a little fir tree like this, the branches at the top generally point up in a V shape, and then as you go a little bit further down, they start going a little bit more out because they're heavier. So slight angle. One thing you really want to avoid when you do trees like this is getting this really repetitive pattern. So look at the gaps between the branches. What you want to do is make sure the gaps aren't like completely side by side and similar on each side. So the more variety you can do, the more realistic that tree is going to look. So like I said, as we get down here, the branches start to kind of go out a little bit more. And typically, these little kind of young fir trees, the branches go right down to the ground. Alright, so nice unique shape, a few little areas with gaps so you can see almost through the tree to the background. You don't want to overdo those gaps though, so you can kind of tidy it up a little bit. Okay, I'm going to go back to the tree trunk color. And we'll start putting in some trees on this side because again we want to frame in the landscape. We'll do a little kind of sapling right here. Maybe it's a little more sparse on this side, so maybe we'll just do 3 trees on this side, a little bit more individualized. take this right up off the top. Okay, so I want this tree to have foliage on it, so I'm gonna have to create branches down low like this. So I want to create a little bit of a gap underneath it so you can see through to the background, but I don't want to overdo it either. So just we'll start out with a few branches. Once we add all the foliage in, then we can connect it up a little bit more. Alright, so that's going to be our basic setup. What I want to do now is let all of that dry, and in the meantime I'll work in on the clouds again. Alright, so I'm going to switch to a small round brush. I'm going to take my white and add the tiniest bit of yellow ochre. So we're just warming up the white a little bit. We want it to still look white, but kind of have that sense of warmth to it. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to start over here. I'm going to go a little bit slower now. And I'm going to start highlighting my clouds out towards the light source. I want to give myself some room to go lighter too, so you don't want to overdo the brightness here. So just like before, what I'm going to do is leave some of that darker area in there, which will end up being a contour. Up here, probably not super important because it's going to get covered with foliage, but I like to have my bases covered, so I'm going to put this in anyway. So that way when I do put in the foliage, if there's an opening, it will kind of make sense that there's some lighter color back there. Even in through here, I'm not going to be as picky with how it looks in through this area. I'm just going to throw in some kind of light spots like that. I'm going to focus more in on these areas where the foliage won't cover as much. So as I go away from the brightest spot, I'm putting less pressure on the brush. But what you can see I did here is left all of those little contours. I don't want them to be repetitive, so I'm going to whittle down this shape right here. Alright, so it has a little bit of yellow in there, which will create the sense of warm light. I'm going to do that. Same thing. Highlight this little baby cloud that's out in front. Alright, I'm going to reload the brush, same color. Just put a thicker layer of paint through here. Okay, same layer again. So again, through here, probably not super important to do a whole bunch of stuff up through here, but I am gonna highlight over here just because, like I said, if I do foliage through here and it doesn't cover all of it, all of these highlights, at least the stuff that pokes through in the background makes sense. So first layer down. Now what I want to do, this part's a little bit harder, so we're going to reload the brush again. We're going to do the same thing down here. We're going to start lower. We're going to create a little contour shape with this dark color. And I'm going to push this up slowly to that other edge. So we want that edge to be slightly visible. We're overlapping with very light pressure. Okay, and then I'm going to do that again. So I'm going to start in a different area. I'm going to go over here. And I'm brushing up. Okay, with a really thin layer, I'm going to add just a little bit in through here. Again, foliage probably going to cover up a good majority of this. Okay, we'll do the same thing over here now. I'm going to go a little bit faster. Anytime you have like inconsistent looking brush strokes, you can take your finger and kind of scrub it a little bit, and that will bring everything together. I want to do one more little layer in through here just to get the highlights down a little bit further to create some more depth. So just this little spot here. And then it'll be a matter of lightening up some of these areas through here. Alright, so I'm going to take that same color now, but I'm going to add a little bit more white to it. And I'm going to go over these same spots, but now I'm just doing some little curved brush strokes, which will help give some texture within the highlights. Okay, so a thinner layer on the brush down here. So we're getting lots of little variations. I'm going to go even over here and add in just like this little, think of it kind of as like an upside down triangle shape. We'll blend it up a little bit more. So lots of little textures in there, creates a nice look to the clouds. Okay, and I want to kind of highlight a little bit more through here. I don't want to overdo the contours, which can kind of happen sometimes. That's a little bit better. Alright, I'm going to call that good for now, and then I think I'm going to go back to the foliage now, so that way I can kind of get an idea of how bright the clouds look, because there's a few little wispy here. They may appear darker once I add the foliage in, or they may appear too bright, and then we'll have to adjust. So I'm going to add in the foliage next, and then we'll go from there. All right, next we're gonna take a flat brush. I'm just gonna prop this down now. So we're gonna take a flat brush, we're gonna go into that trunk color. We're gonna add some sap green and ultramarine blue to that. Add a little touch of black, yellow ochre. Go a little bit cerulean blue. Just want to cool the color down a touch. I'm going to tap into the paint. So tapping straight down. It's going to spread the bristles out. And we're going to start blocking in on the trees. I'm going to start where all the thickest foliage would be at first. So kind of over here, up top. It's going to have some of the foliage kind of breaking up here towards the edge. Okay, so the next part through here is where we're going to start tapping a little bit lighter. That's where the foliage is going to be the thinnest on these smaller sapling type trees. We'll tap it up through here. Light pressure on the brush and twisting in your fingers to get some random foliage. Do the same down here. Light pressure. Always twisting in your fingers to get different patterns. Maybe a little bit thicker through here where these trees connect. All right, and then through here we'll go thick again. Okay, we'll add some extra branches to that a little bit later to connect up some of this foliage. So we'll play around with that a little bit. But what I want to do too is add in some ground bushes. Okay, so just a little bit of stuff down there. All right, we're going to do the same thing now. Over here. So a little bit harder. Pressing on the brush strokes whenever you want thicker foliage, so right through these areas. And again, we'll add in branches a little bit later. But you can see how I was talking about earlier, if you have these little openings through the trees, you want everything to be tied in the background so it all makes sense. So lighter pressure here. So another thing you can do is add a tiny touch of water to your paint, just a little bit. And then when you touch it, we'll have kind of more spread out patterns. All right, I want to go back to my liner brush. I'm going to take a little ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, just our normal trunk color. I want to add a bunch of little branches in through here. Because we want the foliage to make sense. Can add some more branches in through here. Okay, then we'll go back to our flat brush and our foliage. Again, very light tapping. Nice unique shapes in there. I'm going to have this come out a little bit more on this side. Okay, then down here, again, a little bit of foliage on the ground. All right, I'm gonna bring this back up here. So we're gonna have our light source going left to right, which means these trees will cast shadows across a little bit. I'm gonna start off the grass color with kind of more of like a, we'll take some burnt sienna, some yellow, a little cerulean blue, a little bit more yellow ochre. I'm going to start off with like a muddy brown color, or muddy green color. And I want light coming through and casting shadows across. So I'm going to do a strip like this. So using the fan brush. Really subtle at first. We'll do a strip right through here. Okay, we'll do a strip just above this tree. So we're going to hit the top edge because there's going to be a shadow coming off this tree, and then we'll build it a little bit more over here coming into this area. Then we're going to do a little strip right here. Alright, so lots of little kind of lines of highlight, and we're going to, like I said before, we're starting out this grass pretty muted. We'll do a little strip right through here. Okay, so we got some lines of highlight. Next what I'm going to do is I'm going to slowly build up all of these things. So I'm going to go into my liner brush. I'm going to go into my burnt sienna. I want to add some ultramarine blue to my burnt sienna and some white. So we're going to get like a relatively warm gray. And I want to highlight the bottom portion of this tree. A little bit on this one. I'll do the same up here, but I'm not going to highlight the entire tree. I'm going to go in through the top portion like this. I'm going to leave the very bottom portion darker. I'm going to work my way up through because I'm going to be overlapping that later with foliage. So we'll hit a few spots that are going up through the tree. Okay, I'm going to come over to this side now. Highlighting the bottom portion of these trees. So just keep in mind that this is kind of going to be a shadow color in the end as well, because we're going to highlight even more. We want a few spots that are really dark, but we're going to go up through. Okay, so we got little branches, and again we're going to be overlapping some of this stuff, so it's okay to put in these branches that are not connected because we'll overlap it later. You can also add in some other branches later on that connect up everything. Alright, I'm going to highlight the little fir tree. So I'm going to take some sap green and I'm going to mix it in. Take a little burnt sienna and mix it into that grass color. So sap green into the grass color with some burnt sienna. Okay, next what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab some of my yellow ochre, sap green, burnt sienna, so we're making a muddy green. We're going to add a little cad yellow to that. And we'll tap in. And I'm going to start over here on this tree. And we're going to tap in some color. So again, just like before, we're tapping and twisting a little bit in our fingers. This time we're going to leave some gaps in between the brush strokes. Okay, so tapping really lightly when I want it to look a little bit more sporadic. And once I have a decent layer on here, I'm going to go a little bit more blue and sap green down low here. Start to get a little bit, almost like a little bit of a shadow down low. Okay, and I'm going to stick with that same combo. I'm going to start adding in a little bit of color to these trees, but these ones are going to be more in shadow. So I'm going to keep the colors a little bit darker. Alright, so then I'm going to switch to my fan brush. We're going to continue with our layers. I'm going to go into that grass color, but now I'm going to add more yellow ochre and some cad yellow. I'm going to go with a little bit of burnt sienna because I want the grass color to be a little bit muted. Just light pressure on the brush. As we add in some of this color, you can add a little bit of water to the paint if you're finding that you're not able to get these streaks with the fan brush, if it's going on a little bit like blobs. Just add a touch of water. But I want to stick with this same pattern that I had from before. And then a little bit, we'll do a little bit right here. So we're keeping those shadows coming off really subtle. Okay, now with that, what we're going to do, go back to the liner brush. I'm going to go into my burnt sienna. I'm going to add in a little bit of burnt umber. So you can use burnt umber or raw umber. So that might be a little too light, so you can add a little bit more raw umber or burnt umber. So we'll bring it all the way down to the ground and then just kind of touch up the bottom there with your finger. Maybe go a little bit more of your brown color. You work your way up through. So we've got a couple branches peeking through up here. And then we'll move over to this side. Same thing. Alright, we can go in with some more raw umber. Go really lightly through this area to add in some more branches. Some of these gaps. Same with over here if you want to add in a few more branches. I'll go a little bit lighter down below. I'll darken this, or lighten this up a little bit down here too. Alright, so now I want to go into my sap green, little yellow ochre, and burnt sienna. We'll mix it in with the grass color a little bit of white. We'll highlight the pine tree here and just some spots. So we're going to leave this side over here on the right a little bit more in shadow. And then what I want to do is, once I get some of this in here, so just some random spots, just because you want it to look like the light's coming around the tree a little bit. You can even like highlight down close to the ground and just kind of incorporate it into the grass a little bit. Alright, so I mentioned some connecting color, and what I'm going to do is just take a little bit more on the sap green side, a little touch of black into that. Just as the color comes around, we're adding in this darker color, so it's slightly lighter than what's on there now. Okay, I'll go back to the lighter color again, mix it into the darker color. Add a little cad yellow to that. A little white. So we're getting little bits of highlight here. going to go into that same color, more cad yellow, more yellow ochre, a little bit of burnt sienna to tone it down, and some white. Okay, and we'll start bringing the value up on the grass a little bit more. Okay, I'll probably go another round on that. What I'm going to do in the meantime, I'm going to go into my sap green, cad yellow, a little burnt sienna, again to kind of tone it down a little bit. Maybe add a touch of water. And I'll start adding in some little detail leaves. So this is tedious, and what you want to do is just take your liner brush or tapping the brush out towards our light source, and just getting kind of this variety of brush stroke that overlaps some of our shadows. And through this part here, we want to do the same, just tapping and overlapping. Create a few individual leaves kind of outside the current border that you have. If you need to get it lighter, you can always add a little more yellow or white. But this is one of those things where you're gonna want to take your time. So start working kind of within the tree, and what we're doing is just kind of tapping and then leaving some spaces. So we're getting like a variety of shape. We want to leave lots of little dark gaps in between. Okay, so sometimes you're going to want to leave kind of like some bigger gaps. Kind of change the direction of your brush too. Okay, so I'm going to continue through there. I'll let you kind of work on that on your own. What I'm going to do is take a little bit more yellow into that, some burnt sienna, and white. We'll lighten this up again. But we don't have to hit every single spot. I'm gonna wipe off my liner brush, grab some white, a little raw umber, go a little bit brighter down the base of these trees, especially out on the edge towards the light source. Alright, so on this side, you can see I've added in some textures over here, just random brush strokes is all we were doing. And you can kind of play around with color. If you wanted to go a little bit more bright green, you could add in some brighter green, especially out on the left-hand side here. If you wanted to go a little bit brighter, you're just tapping, especially once you've got a bunch of layers on there, then you can kind of play around with how bright you go and just kind of throwing in some random highlights here and there. So you can do multiple layers here, again, as much as you want. The key really is to try to just go sparingly and overlap a bunch and twist the brush, kind of change directions here and there. Alright, so play around with that. And then on the other side, we're going to do the same thing, except we're going to go more sap green, because this side is going to be more in shadow, so there shouldn't be quite as many brighter leaves. So we're tapping, getting some textures in here. You can go even darker with the sap green as you get out to this edge. If you want to add in some of these kind of little individual leaves that kind of reach out beyond the border. So the basic thing here is we're just trying to create a bunch of random textures so it doesn't look flat. So the first round through, just kind of add in these random darker leaves, mostly sap green, a little bit of yellow, still leaving gaps. Okay, and I'm going to work that through over here, but as I get further to the left, I am going to add a little more yellow. So over here, we're tapping in, but we're starting to get a little bit more yellow, a little bit more of a vibrant color. And we can bring a few of those here and there. Over to the right. We're just slowly kind of building up. And the key with the highlights over here is that they're really kind of random. Little bits of light are getting through and just catching the leaves here and there. All right, so continue working on through that, and then we will catch up on the next step. Little bits of saturation. So the further right you go and the further down, you know, the fewer spots you'll want to hit. Okay, and you can do the same over on the other side, but maybe add a little sap green to it, so it's not quite as yellow. Alright, maybe we'll add in, we'll take some burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, some white, a little touch of cerulean blue, maybe we'll add in another little layer of clouds up here. Just to help kind of increase the contrast. May have to touch up the leaves just a little bit. Okay, we'll take that same color. Maybe down low here we've got some clouds shooting by.